In 1453, a 21-year-old sultan stood outside the walls of Constantinople, the city that had broken every army for 1,000 years. He had cannons large enough to swallow a man whole, dragged across mountains by oxen and human muscle. He had warships hauled overland on greased logs because the Bosphorus was chained shut. And on the morning of the 29th of May, the last Roman emperor vanished into the smoke, and the most defended city on earth fell silent. This is the entire history of the Ottoman Empire. 6 centuries, 3 continents, a border tribe of nomads who turned themselves into a superpower that turned itself into a corpse, and a corpse the modern Middle East is still arguing over today. It begins in a place no one was watching, northwestern Anatolia, late 1200s. 2 giants are dying at the same time. To the west, the Byzantine Empire, what is left of the Roman world after centuries of crusader sackings, plague, and civil war, is shrinking by the year. To the east, the Seljuk Sultanate of Rum has just been broken by the Mongols and reduced to a vassal of the Ilkhanate. Between them runs a long, porous frontier where neither side can really enforce a border, and on that frontier sit dozens of small Turkish warbands, Ghazis, frontier raiders riding light horses, half Muslim, half shamanist, mostly hungry. Most of these warbands will be forgotten. One of them will not. Its leader is a chieftain named Osman, born around 1258, son of a tribal lord named Ertugrul, who had ridden into Anatolia generations earlier with the great migrations from the steppes. The Ottoman dynasty takes its name from him, Osmanli in Turkish, Ottoman in English. There is no founding moment, no grand treaty, no battle that marks the start. There is just a man with a few hundred horsemen, a scrap of pasture near the town of Soyut, and the instinct to push west into Byzantine ground while everyone else is fighting over the east. The traditional date is 1299. By then, Osman has begun raiding Byzantine border posts in the hills above Bursa. Within a generation, his son Orhan will take Bursa itself in 1326 and turn it into the first Ottoman capital. And here is the first thing the Ottomans do that nobody else does. They do not just raid, they stay, they build, they administer, they marry into local Christian families. They invite Greek farmers to keep working the land in exchange for taxes lower than what the Byzantine state was charging. The peasants notice. The frontier starts moving. Not because Ottoman armies are unstoppable, but because Ottoman rule is, for ordinary people, often gentler than what they had before. By the 1350s, Orhan has done something no Turkish chieftain in living memory has done. He has crossed into Europe. The trigger is, ironically, a Byzantine civil war. A pretender named John Cantacuzene asks the Ottomans for help and gives Orhan his daughter in marriage. Ottoman troops cross the Dardanelles to fight on his behalf, and notice something. Thrace, the rich heartland of Roman Europe for over 1,000 years, is undefended. In 1354, an earthquake levels the walls of the town of Gallipoli, and Ottoman forces simply walk in and never leave. A bridgehead has been planted in Europe. The Byzantines, by accident, have just handed away their continent. Orhan's son Murad takes it from there. By 1361 he has taken Adrianople, modern Edirne, and made it the new capital. Read that again. Less than 100 years after Osman's first raids in the hills, the Ottomans have moved their capital out of Asia and into Europe. They are now a European state, and their sultans will live in Edirne for the next 90 years. Murad does something else. He builds an army nobody else in the world has. The traditional Ottoman force is light cavalry, Sipahis, Turkish horsemen who serve in exchange for land grants, useful but unreliable for sieges and pitched battles. So Murad creates an infantry corps drawn from a source nobody else thought of. The Christian peasantry of his own conquered Balkan territories. The system is called devshirme, the gathering. Ottoman officials ride into Christian villages, look at the boys between the ages of 8 and 18, and take a quota of them. The boys are converted to Islam, raised in the Sultan's household, and trained from childhood as professional soldiers. They are forbidden to marry, forbidden to own property, forbidden any loyalty except to the Sultan personally. They are called the Janissaries, Yenicheri, the new troops. It is, by modern standards, a horrifying system. Children taken from their parents, often never seen again. But it produces for 2 centuries the most disciplined infantry in the world. While Western European kings still rely on feudal levies that go home after 40 days, the Sultan has a standing professional army that fights 12 months a year. And, critically, the Janissaries are personally loyal to the throne. They have no families to defend, no estates to protect, no rival lords to obey. The Ottomans have just solved, in a single brutal stroke, the problem that will plague every other monarchy in Europe for the next 4 centuries. Murad uses this army to crush the Serbian Empire at Kosovo in 1389. The battle is a draw on the field. Both kings die, including Murad himself, knifed by a Serbian noble who had pretended to surrender, but strategically it is total. Serbia is broken. Bulgaria is annexed within 4 years. The Balkans are now Ottoman, and the world finally starts to pay attention. Murad's son Bayezid is given the nickname Yildirim, the Thunderbolt, for the speed of his marches. He fights on 3 fronts at once, swallows the rival Turkish emirates of central Anatolia, beats a crusader army of French and Hungarian knights at Nicopolis in 1396, and lays siege to Constantinople. He is, by 1400, possibly the most powerful single ruler on earth. And then a man rides out of Central Asia and erases him. His name is Timur. In Europe he is remembered as Tamerlane. He has spent 40 years building a Mongol-style empire stretching from Delhi to Damascus, and he has decided that a rising Ottoman state is not something he intends to share the world with. In July 1402, on a plain near Ankara, Timur and Bayezid meet. The Ottoman army is shattered. Bayezid himself is captured alive, the only Ottoman sultan in 6 centuries to be taken prisoner. He dies in captivity within a year, possibly by his own hand. Some accounts say he was carried around in a cage. Most modern historians doubt the cage, but the humiliation was real enough. Anatolia collapses. Bayezid's 4 sons fight a civil war for the throne that lasts 11 years. The empire, built over 100 years, almost dies in a decade. By any reasonable expectation, this should have been the end. Almost every empire that suffers a defeat this complete simply disintegrates. The Ottomans are different. The youngest son, Mehmed, eventually wins. His son Murad II rebuilds, and his grandson, Mehmed II, born in 1432, finishes what Bayezid started. He is 21 years old when he marches on Constantinople in the spring of 1453. Constantinople has been the capital of the Roman world for over 1,100 years. Its land walls, built by the Emperor Theodosius in the 5th century, are the most successful fortifications ever constructed. A triple line of moat, outer wall, and massive inner wall, studded with 96 towers. Every besieger who has thrown himself at those walls has gone home empty-handed. The city has survived Persians, Arabs, Bulgars, Russians, Crusaders. The walls have not. Mehmed brings something new. A Hungarian engineer named Orban, ironically a Christian, has offered his services to the highest bidder. The Byzantines could not afford him. The Ottomans could. Orban casts the largest cannons the world has ever seen. The great bombard is 27 feet long, fires a stone ball weighing 600 pounds, and takes 60 oxen and 400 men to move. The cannons are slow. They can only fire 7 times a day. But every time they fire, a section of the Theodosian walls comes down. The siege lasts 53 days. The defenders, perhaps 7,000 men under the last emperor Constantine XI, hold against an army of perhaps 80,000. They patch the walls every night with rubble and timber. They sink ships at the entrance to the Golden Horn to keep the Ottoman fleet out. Mehmed's response is to drag 72 warships overland on greased logs around the chain blocking the harbor and launch them into the Golden Horn from above. The defenders wake up to find a fleet on a body of water no fleet should have been able to reach. On the night of the 28th of May, both sides know it is coming. The defenders gather in the Hagia Sophia for the last Christian liturgy ever held there. The emperor takes communion, then rides back to the walls. The final assault begins in the small hours of the 29th. Wave after wave of Ottoman troops break against the breach near the St. Romanus Gate. The Janissaries go in last. A small postern gate is found unlocked. Ottoman flags appear on the walls. The defenders panic. Constantine XI is last seen charging into the chaos near the breach and disappears. His body is never identified. By midday, the city is Ottoman. Mehmed rides through the gate, dismounts at the Hagia Sophia, and converts the great church into a mosque on the spot. The Roman Empire, founded in 27 B.C., dies on a Tuesday afternoon in May 1453. The Ottomans have a new capital. They will keep it for the next 470 years. Mehmed is 21 years old, and he has just done what no Muslim army has managed in 8 centuries of trying. From this moment, the Ottomans stop being a regional power. They become an empire in the full sense of the word. What follows is the greatest century in Ottoman history. Mehmed's grandson, Selim I, Selim the Grim, turns south. In 1514, he crushes the rival Safavid dynasty of Persia at Chaldiran. In 1517, he marches into Cairo and ends the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt. With one campaign, he doubles the size of the empire and adds Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. The Sultan is now also the Caliph, formally the leader of all Sunni Muslims on earth, and the protector of Islam's 3 holiest cities. The Ottoman state has become, in a single generation, the most powerful Islamic empire since the early caliphate 800 years before. Selim's son Suleiman takes the throne in 1520. In Turkish, he is called Kanuni, the lawgiver, for the legal code he assembles. In Europe, they call him Suleiman the Magnificent. He rules for 46 years. Under him, the empire reaches its greatest extent. Belgrade falls in 1521. Rhodes falls in 1522. In 1526, a Hungarian army is annihilated at Mohacs in less than 2 hours, and the Kingdom of Hungary effectively ceases to exist. 3 years later, Suleiman is at the gates of Vienna. Vienna, in 1529, is the high water mark. The siege lasts only a few weeks. The Ottoman army, exhausted by a long march and an early winter, withdraws. They leave their tents behind in the rain. But what matters is that they got there. An Ottoman sultan personally led an army deep into Central Europe, and the Holy Roman Emperor in Vienna spent the next 40 years sleeping badly. The Ottomans control more territory in Europe than any single power between Rome and Napoleon. They control the Crimea, most of the Black Sea coast, North Africa, as far west as Algiers, and the Indian Ocean trade through the Red Sea. The Mediterranean has effectively become an Ottoman lake. In 1565, their fleet is checked at Malta by the Knights Hospitaller. In 1571, a combined Christian fleet finally beats them at Lepanto and sinks most of their galleys. The Ottomans rebuild the entire fleet within a year. The lesson everyone takes away from Lepanto is that the empire is no longer invincible. The lesson the Ottomans take away is that they can replace ships faster than the rest of the world can sink them. Suleiman dies in 1566 in his tent during yet another Hungarian campaign. He is 71 years old. His Grand Vizier hides the death from the army for 48 days, marching the corpse home so the soldiers will not panic. By the time the news breaks, his son Selim II is safely on the throne, and the system has held. From the outside, the empire looks invincible. From the inside, the cracks have already started. The first crack is the throne itself. Ottoman succession has no rule of primogeniture. Any son of the sultan can inherit. To prevent civil war, sultans traditionally killed their brothers on accession. Mehmed II made the practice law. By the late 16th century, the empire has run out of patience for this. Mehmed III, on his accession in 1595, has 19 of his brothers strangled with silk bowstrings on a single day, including infants. The shock is great enough that the practice is replaced with something almost worse. Princes are now confined to a building inside the palace called the cafés, the cage. They live there from boyhood, with concubines who are not allowed to bear children, with no education in government, no military experience, no contact with the outside world. When one of them is dragged out to take the throne, he often arrives mentally broken. For 2 centuries, the empire is ruled intermittently by men who have spent their entire adult lives as prisoners. The second crack is the Janissaries. By the early 17th century, the system has rotted. Janissaries are now allowed to marry, allowed to own property, allowed to enroll their sons in the corps, allowed to run businesses on the side. They have stopped being the Sultan's loyal slave soldiers and become a hereditary urban militia with strong commercial interests. They depose sultans they dislike. In 1622, they murder the young Sultan Osman II, who had tried to reform them. Every Ottoman ruler from this point on rules by their permission. The third crack is geography. The empire is too big. Communications run at the speed of a horse. By the time orders reach Algiers from Istanbul, the situation has changed twice. Provincial governors stop sending tax revenue and start running personal fiefdoms. The treasury is permanently short of cash. Inflation, driven partly by Spanish silver flooding in from the New World, eats into salaries. Nobody is paid on time. And yet the empire is still expanding. In 1683, more than a century and a half after Suleiman first reached Vienna, an Ottoman army arrives there again, this time under the Grand Vizier, Kara Mustafa Pasha. The siege lasts 2 months. The Holy Roman Emperor flees the city. The walls are mined. The relief army, a coalition of Polish, Austrian, and German forces under the Polish King Jan Sobieski, arrives on the morning of the 12th of September, 1683. Sobieski's hussars come down the slopes of the Kahlenberg in what is still possibly the largest cavalry charge in European history, 18,000 horsemen on a single front. The Ottoman army breaks. Kara Mustafa retreats to Belgrade, where he is met by a silk bowstring sent from the Sultan. He is strangled in his tent in December. Vienna, 1683, is the turning point. From this moment, for the next 240 years, the Ottoman Empire is in retreat. The Treaty of Karlowitz, signed in 1699, is the first peace the Ottomans ever sign as the loser. They give up almost all of Hungary to the Habsburgs. The frontier that had crept westward for 3 centuries starts moving back the other way and never stops. The 18th century is a long, slow shrinking. Russia, under Peter the Great, and then Catherine, claws away the Black Sea coast. The Crimean Khanate, an Ottoman vassal for 3 centuries, is annexed by Russia in 1783. North African provinces drift into autonomy. The treasury is permanently empty. Every sultan tries to reform the army. Every sultan is checked by the Janissaries. In 1826, Sultan Mehmed II finally finishes them. He builds a new artillery corps in secret, deliberately provokes the Janissaries into one of their usual barracks revolts, and then turns the cannons on them. The Janissary barracks are bombarded for hours. Survivors are hunted through the streets. 6,000 are killed in a single afternoon. The corps is officially abolished. The Ottomans call it Vaka-i Hayriye, the auspicious incident. The new army is built on European lines, with European drill, European uniforms, European officers. It does not save them, because by now the empire has earned a new name in European chancelleries, the sick man of Europe. The phrase is attributed to Tsar Nicholas I of Russia in 1853. The Russians want to carve up the empire and take its share. The British and the French do not want them to, because a Russian-dominated Mediterranean is a strategic nightmare. So Britain and France fight a war on Ottoman soil, the Crimean War, to keep the empire alive. They win, sort of. The empire stays in one piece. It also goes deeper into debt to London and Paris than any state in history. By 1875, the Ottoman government cannot pay the interest on its loans. By 1881, European creditors take over Ottoman finances directly through an institution called the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. Customs revenue, tobacco taxes, salt taxes, all of it is collected by foreign administrators and paid straight to European bondholders. The empire has technically lost control of its own treasury. The 19th century also brings the slow disintegration of the Balkans. Greece wins independence in 1830 after a brutal war that captures the imagination of European intellectuals. Lord Byron dies fighting for the Greeks at Missolonghi. Serbia becomes autonomous, then independent. Romania, Bulgaria, Montenegro all break away. By 1878, the empire's European territory has been reduced to a thin strip running from Istanbul to the Adriatic. By 1913, after 2 Balkan wars, even that is gone. 5 centuries of Ottoman rule in southeastern Europe end in 5 years. Inside the empire, a generation of young officers and intellectuals becomes convinced that the only way to save what remains is to remake the state on European lines. They are called the Young Turks. In 1908, they force the Sultan, Abdulhamid II, to restore the constitution he had suspended 30 years earlier. A year later, they depose him entirely. The Sultanate continues, but real power passes to a triumvirate of officers, Enver, Talat, and Cemal, who run the empire in increasingly dictatorial fashion through the Committee of Union and Progress. And then comes 1914. Enver Pasha, the most ambitious of the three, signs a secret alliance with Germany. The empire enters the First World War on the side of the Central Powers. It is a catastrophic decision. The Ottomans hold their own at Gallipoli, where a young divisional commander named Mustafa Kemal stops a British and Anzac landing that should have ended the war in a year. They lose almost everywhere else. The Russians break the Eastern Front. The British take Baghdad and Jerusalem. T.E. Lawrence and the Hashemite Arab revolt unravel the Hejaz. Famine kills hundreds of thousands of civilians in Syria and Lebanon. And in 1915, in the middle of the war, the Ottoman government carries out the deportation and mass killing of its Armenian Christian population in eastern Anatolia. Between 600,000 and 1.5 million Armenians die from massacres, forced marches into the Syrian desert, starvation, and disease. It is the first genocide of the 20th century. The word genocide itself was coined 3 decades later, partly to describe what happened here. The modern Republic of Turkey still officially disputes the term. The events themselves are not in dispute among historians outside Turkey. The war ends for the Ottomans in October 1918 with the Armistice of Mudros. Allied troops occupy Istanbul. The British, French, and Italians carve the empire into spheres of influence. The Treaty of Sèvres in 1920 is even worse than what the Treaty of Versailles did to Germany. The Ottomans are reduced to a rump state in central Anatolia. Eastern Anatolia is to become an Armenian republic. Western Anatolia is to be ruled by Greece. The Straits are to be internationalized. There is nothing left. And here, at the very end, the empire produces one last act of defiance, though not from the empire itself. Mustafa Kemal, the same officer who held Gallipoli, refuses to accept Sèvres. He goes to Anatolia, organizes a parallel government in Ankara, and builds an army out of the wreckage of the Ottoman one. He fights the Greeks across western Anatolia for 3 years, beats them decisively at the Battle of the Sakarya in 1921, and drives their army into the sea at Smyrna in 1922. The Allies, exhausted, agree to renegotiate. The Treaty of Lausanne in 1923 recognizes a new state, the Republic of Turkey, within almost the borders of modern Turkey today. The Ottoman dynasty is abolished. The last sultan, Mehmed VI, leaves Istanbul on a British warship in November 1922. The caliphate is abolished 2 years later. Mehmed dies in exile in Italy in 1926. His son and the rest of the family are forbidden to return to Turkey for half a century. A 623-year-old empire ends not in a battle, but in a vote of the Grand National Assembly in Ankara. What did it leave behind? A lot more than most people think. 28 modern countries sit on territory that was once Ottoman, from Algeria to Yemen to Bosnia. The borders of every state in the modern Middle East run along lines first sketched by Ottoman provincial administrators and later redrawn by British and French diplomats, who did not always know what they were doing. The Sykes-Picot Agreement of 1916, which divided Ottoman Arab lands between Britain and France, is still being argued over by every faction in the modern Middle East. Inside Turkey, the Ottoman legacy is more complicated. Ataturk's republic was built explicitly against the Ottoman past. Secularism instead of caliphate, Latin alphabet instead of Arabic script, Western law codes instead of Islamic ones. For 2 generations, the Ottoman period was officially something to be moved on from. In the last 25 years, that has shifted. Ottoman history is taught again. Ottoman cuisine, Ottoman music, Ottoman costume drama. All of it has come back into Turkish public life with a vengeance. Hagia Sophia, which Ataturk turned into a museum in 1934, was reconverted into a mosque in 2020. What is harder to pin down is the human legacy. For 6 centuries, Greeks, Armenians, Jews, Arabs, Kurds, Bulgarians, Bosnians, Albanians, and Turks lived inside the same political structure. The Ottoman millet system was not equality. Non-Muslims paid extra taxes and had limited civil rights. But it was, by the standards of early modern Europe, remarkably tolerant. Sephardic Jews expelled from Spain in 1492 found refuge in Ottoman cities and built communities there that lasted 400 years. Greeks were the dominant merchants of Istanbul for centuries. Armenians ran the imperial mint and built half the great mosques of the capital. That world ended between 1915 and 1923. The Armenian community of Anatolia was destroyed. The Greek community of Anatolia was uprooted in the population exchange of 1923, and the Turkish community of Greece with it. 1.5 million people moved across the Aegean in a few months, most of whom had never seen the country they were now told was theirs. The cosmopolitan port cities of the eastern Mediterranean, Smyrna, Salonika, Alexandria, were stripped of the populations that had defined them. The Ottoman Empire was many things at once: a nomadic warband that learned bureaucracy, a Sunni caliphate that ruled millions of Christians and Jews, a military state whose elite was made up of converted slaves, a European power that was always treated as somehow not European, a Muslim power that, at its peak, was probably the most religiously tolerant large empire on earth, and, in the end, a state that could not industrialize fast enough to keep up with the powers that surrounded it. It rose because the Byzantines were dying, and the Mongols had broken the Seljuks, and a small warband on a quiet frontier was paying attention. It survived its near death at Ankara in 1402 because it had built institutions deep enough to outlast a single defeated sultan. It reached its peak under Suleiman because it had figured out how to combine cavalry, professional infantry, gunpowder artillery, and provincial administration on a scale nobody else could match. It declined because the world around it changed faster than it did, and because the institutions that had made it great, the Janissaries, the devshirme, the closed succession, calcified into the very things that held it back. And it ended because a global war that nobody really wanted finally broke the patient European balance that had been keeping it on life support for a century, 623 years, from a chieftain on a hilltop above Soyut to a sultan boarding a British warship in the Bosphorus. The Ottomans do not fit neatly into any of the stories Europe likes to tell about itself, and they do not fit neatly into any of the stories the modern Middle East likes to tell about itself either. That is part of why they keep getting rediscovered in every generation by people surprised that an empire most of them barely studied turns out to have shaped the world they live in. If you enjoyed this journey through 6 centuries of empire, hit the subscribe button so you do not miss the next one.